Hi everyone, my name is Jeff. I run this channel, and I wasn't expecting to do vlogs on this channel at all, but now here's the second one, so maybe this will become a regular thing. But because this is normally a review channel, and that's what most people have signed up for, I completely understand if you want to skip ahead to the next one. I do that a lot of times myself. But the reason why I'm coming on here and why I'm doing this little vlog type of thing is because there was a movie that came out this last weekend. I went ahead and went to see it. That I have a little bit of like insider information or behind the scenes type of stuff because my family was actually involved in the real story. So thought I'd drop on here and kind of give some context to it. I'm probably going to do a whole thing about it, when it comes out on video, so I can actually show clips and all that sort of thing. But right now, I don't really have a lot of time to edit things and all that sort of thing, particularly because I've been working on this Sanctuary, the game of cat rescue. It's the game that I invented that's now right now on Kickstarter. So if you want the in the description is the link to that, and you can see where that is and go and back it and stuff. But anyway, so I don't have a lot of time right now to do other things. Plus, I don't want to break up Dude Andor. That'll just go straight through. I just figure I'll come on here and sort of explain some things about it. This is going to be a bit long and rambling. I'm not as good when I don't write things down, when I just talk off the cuff. So like I say, I'll do a whole special thing on it later on. But for now, I just figured I'd jump in here and tell you a little bit about it. I mean, for those who've been interested. Anyway, the movie is "Deliver Me from Nowhere." It's Bruce Springsteen's journey as he wrote the album Nebraska. Yeah, like I say, my family actually had an association with this, not just because I'm from Nebraska, but because of several other things. Yeah, I'll go through the different parts of it. Essentially, it's by the way, I'm looking up because I have my notes up there, so I remember again. I'm not very good off the cuff, but to understand what happened sort of behind the scenes of this album, you do have to understand three things. The Charles Starkweather murders, the book Carol, and the movie Badlands, which actually the movie talks about a little bit, skims through that. I actually haven't read the book. I'll be interested to know what that is. I'll probably get that on audiobook, listen to it at some point. When I was writing my book about the subject of this, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But when I was writing my own, I tried to get in touch with Bruce Springsteen to learn, what his influence was for this, because I knew that he had written the album about the Starkweather murders. In fact, he literally says in the town of Lincoln, Nebraska, and he uses quotes from Charlie and all that sort of thing. But I didn't really understand his point of view with all that. Anyway, so first part, let's talk. I'll tell you a bit about the Starkweather murders, and this is sort of where my family, comes into this. In 1958, this 19-year-old young man named Charlie Starkweather kidnapped his 14-year-old ex-girlfriend. Yes, it was a 19-year-old with a 14-year-old. Her parents had told her to break it off because it was inappropriate. She started realizing he's crazy. She had broken up with him on a Sunday, and then on Tuesday, he shows up at her house, killed her family while she was still at school. It was her mother, her stepfather, and her 2-year-old half sister. And he put their bodies in the backyard and into a chicken shed back there. And when Carol came home from school, he told her they were being held for ransom, and she had to do everything that he told her to do, or he was going to have her family killed. And so they were in the house for a while. He would tie her up at night, and she would tell everybody to go away. Everyone was sick with the flu, but each time she would do that at the doorway, she would sit there and kind of keep pointing to the side. That was where Charlie was standing there waiting with a gun. And then after they had been there for a while, I mean, basically both families were becoming very suspicious, both her family and Charlie's family. They themselves were calling the police saying, hey, get out there, do something about this. And the police just wouldn't. They were poor family, no one of any importance. And so they just kind of said, stop bugging us, all that sort of thing. And then but then when somebody said to Carol at the door, I'm going to go get the police, Charlie kind of got worried. And so after they were gone, he took Carol into the car and they went out into the out of town and around the state, and that's when he went on his murder spree, and he killed a total of 10 people during that time, and he had killed one other person the month before, making this total of 11. Throughout the time, she actually was leaving clues for the police. She left clues at the house itself. She left a note that she wouldn't have written. In fact, she signed it as somebody else in her handwriting. But again, the police wouldn't cover it, wouldn't follow it up. They wouldn't follow the clues she had left, including this one where she threw some books that belonged to one of the victims out of the window of the car they were in. They fell on the highway going west, and the police literally went, "Let's go east." Like literally, they made the Keystone Cops look competent. So throughout this, entire time, this was the huge news across the entire country, and in fact, internationally. I've seen news articles that were from Russia. Peter Jackson talked about knowing about it in New Zealand. This was worldwide news. Everybody, knew about it. And in the end, eventually, she finally jumped out of his car, escaped from him, and ran to a police car that she saw, and told him that's Starkweather. Starkweather was literally just about to kill a 12th victim. He was about to kill another person. So she saved that person from getting killed, and the police, chased after him. But then, because she then was like, "Why didn't you guys follow my clues?" That started making the police look bad. There was an investigation of them, and so they turned around and accused her of being his accomplice. But they didn't tell her. They charged her without telling her, without giving her an attorney or anything like that for like a couple of weeks. Finally, after a couple of weeks, the State Bar Association was getting so upset that, here's this famous case and they weren't giving her an attorney. So my grandfather got appointed, and that's where I kind of come into this whole thing. He was appalled at how they were basically railroading her. The newspapers were portraying it as the new Bonnie and Clyde, and a lot of the public was turned against her before she even knew she was being charged. It was my grandfather who finally had to say, "I'm your attorney. I'm here to defend you against a murder charge or an accessory to murder charge, for which she could be executed at the age of 14 years old." So there was this, whole trial, gigantic news everywhere, all that sort of thing, and eventually she actually she was found guilty. Not for any rational reason. In fact, all the evidence matched her story. Everything she said matched all the physical evidence, and the stories against her were mainly from Charlie Starkweather. He would say that she did these things. Actually, at first he said that she was innocent. He said the exact same story she did, that he had kidnapped her, etc. But once it got out that she was calling him crazy, he was like that character in A Fish Called Wanda, if you've ever seen that. Don't call me crazy. And he even could have saved his own life by, taking the insanity plea, but he refused to because that was just the biggest thing to him, and so he told a different story. He changed the story, and he literally changed it every single time he told it. He oftentimes didn't even get the number of victims right. He would say like, "Oh, the 2 women, Carol killed those, and I killed all the other 9 men," which that isn't that isn't how it shook out. But yeah, his story did not match the evidence. It didn't match anything that was real. But there was just this emotion that sort of took over. So in the end, yeah, she ended up being found guilty, but they gave her life in prison instead of the death penalty. My grandfather felt that there was such an injustice done that he continued to stick with her for the next 18 years, representing her and working at getting her released until after 18 years he did get her released on parole. Anyway, throughout all this, while this was going on, like I said, it was big news. There was this woman named Ninette Beaver. She was and this sort of goes on to the second part of it now, the book Carol, which was eventually written by Ninette Beaver and a couple other people. She had been the assistant to a guy named Floyd Kalber, who was a reporter at the time. He wound up becoming famous on NBC News. But she was trying to get interviews for him and wound up just getting interviews for herself. People liked her and people trusted her, and so she was, in the middle of all this. And then when it came to a press conference for Carol, this is, by the way, the first press conference for any murder charge, any of this type. I mean, nowadays that's just kind of standard fare, but this was early days of television. And my grandfather didn't want to do it, but finally kind of got pressured into it. And he decided he wanted Ninette Beaver to be the person to interview her. So if you ever see the interview of Carol Fugate with this other person, that's Ninette Beaver. And Ninette stuck with this story after Carol then went to prison. She went to prison at, like I say, 15 years old by the time the trial was done. And she was put in solitary confinement, which is considered torture now. But she was put in solitary because she wasn't old enough to be with the other prisoners. And ended up spending, the next 18 years, never had a disciplinary action, the only inmate who ever had that. But Ninette was fascinated by the story, and she ended up doing a documentary called Growing Up in Prison, and it involved Carol, it involved my grandfather, and, different people involved. It told the story of Carol literally growing up in prison. But then from that, after that, she ended up writing this book called Carol that was about Carol and took very much her point of view, explained what had happened, how this girl had been kidnapped and taken on this horrible, frightening ordeal, and her own family was killed. But then she ended up being, sent away to prison for it. Anyway, so she wrote this book called Carol. Whoops. Little worn. This was the original cover, but it's kind of been a few places over a long period of time, but this was the cover of it. In the movie, you see Bruce Springsteen reading it. Actually, he happens to be at this chapter, the Confessions, and what that actually relates to is that was Charlie's confessions when he told the story of what happened, and he literally changed it 7 different times. If you manage to get this book, you go to that chapter, you see that Ninette Beaver and the other two who wrote it. By the way, one of the others who worked on it with her, I forget which one, but I think it was Ripley. She went on to write the sequel to Gone with the Wind. A weird little bit of trivia. Anyway, but yeah, they lay out in that chapter about how Charlie gave one confession, but then was told, oh yeah, Carol said you're crazy. And so I'll tell you the real story then. And he told a different story. Then right after that, he told another completely different story. Then after that, he told another completely different story. And he gave 7 different confessions that are 7 different stories. And then he told more stories once he was on the witness stand in court. He would even change his story, like sentence to sentence, and anyway, but yeah, didn't change the jury's mind. They literally wound up saying they found her guilty because she looked guilty. That was literally their reasoning for sending her to prison for the rest of her life. Anyway, so they wrote this book called Carol. And about that same time, there was a guy named Terrence Malick who was interested in utilizing this story as inspiration for creating something different. And it so happened that, I think it was his attorney or his manager, somebody who he was working with, knew my grandfather. I don't know how, actually. It's kind of odd because this was California and we were in Nebraska. In fact, he was from a teeny tiny little town in Nebraska called Broken Bow, which, funny enough, there's a character, I think, in the show that Jeremy Allen White is in, The Bear, who's from Broken Bow, Nebraska. Yeah, interesting little bit of trivia there. It just suddenly occurred to me. Anyway, or a little connection. But, so yeah, and they, at this point, they were living in Lincoln. But anyway, somehow he knew him. And so he was like, well, hey, I can introduce you to the lawyer of this woman this girl who was involved. And Terrence said, yeah, it'd be really interesting. So he came to Lincoln, got to know my grandfather, got to know my dad. By that point, my dad had become an attorney and had joined them. And my dad suggested, hey, why don't we go out to see Carol at the penitentiary? And Terry said, yeah, he'd love to. And on the way, he determined if she says no, even though he wasn't planning on doing the actual real story, he was just using this inspiration. He still felt that if Carol said no, she didn't want this to be done, he wouldn't do it. He would flat out refuse to do this movie. He wouldn't write it. He'd do something else. So he went out there and he met Carol, got to know her, and she looked in his eyes and said, I can tell you're a kind man, so you can go ahead and do it. Because by this point he had said, I want to have your permission before I do it. So she thought about it for a while, and then when she looked him in the eyes near the end and said, I can tell you're a kind man, you can do this movie. So Terry went out, he wrote the script. Now, the script is not the true story. The characters are not. There's a reason why he changed the names and why he also didn't have it happen in Nebraska. He was using their story as a launching pad to merely inspire him to create something new. So there's like the ghosts of the true story in there in Badlands, but it's definitely not the true story. The true story was so much more horrendous. In fact, I've never really been able to appreciate Badlands because I see so much of what, there's just enough of the true story in there for me to always be reminded of it and think about that and what a horror show it was. For one thing, Carol did not just sit around looking like Holly does, like, somebody's killed in Badlands and Holly just goes, oh, no. Yeah, no, that is not the way it was. I mean, some of these murders, in particular, the females that Charlie killed were killed in really, really horrific ways. Like he specifically set out. There's a psychology within it that he killed the men quickly and the women in really torturous ways. And Carol was not being okay with that. She thought that her own parents were being held hostage, and it also had to do with, like, if she tried to escape, he was right there at any particular time. But in the end, like I say, she did eventually, run away. She didn't just sort of stroll away the way Holly does in Badlands. Also, in the end, it's funny enough, in the real story, there was this extraordinary chase scene where Charlie got in his car, raced off. The cop that was chasing him, they were going over 100 miles an hour in Wyoming on these Wyoming highways. They wound up in a town, had to slow down, got up on sidewalks, their bumpers locked at one point. They were leaning out of the windows, shooting each other. I mean, this was a dramatic thing. But yet nobody's portrayed it that way in any of these movies for some reason. Anyway, but like I say, Terry was more interested in what he had to say about the subject that this story had inspired out of him. So that's what he created. That's the reason why the characters don't have the name Charles Starkweather and Carol Fugate, why it happens in South Dakota, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing he was very concerned about, he stayed in touch with my father and grandfather and with Carol. Martin Sheen and she actually became quite friends. And when the movie was finished, one of the first screenings they had there in York, which is the town where the prison was, Carol was allowed to leave prison to go and see it. She actually had a key. She was the gate girl. She would actually let people in and out of the prison. And so, yeah, she let herself out to go, watch the movie with them at the local movie theater. And she sat next to Martin Sheen. And at one point, she smacked him and just continued to go right back to the movie. And then afterwards, he was like, why did you hit me at that one point? And she said, because that was the one moment when you got Charlie exactly right. The whole rest of the time, it was nothing like what happened. But that one moment was exactly like him. It was the moment, if you ever watch, Kit walks away from her and he starts punching the air. And they're like by these containers or something like that. And that, she said, that was it. That was the one time when he was very much like Charlie. Anyway, on the release of the movie, Terry was very, very firm about not wanting the movie to get, not wanting there to be a connection to the real thing. In fact, actually, he had wanted to have a special thanks to my dad and grandfather, for their help, and to Carol and all this sort of thing. But she was up for parole at this point. And so he was concerned about that having an effect. So instead, he put a little reference line to them. The line at the end when Holly says, "I married the son of my lawyer," was a reference to my dad. It was kind of like this little, joke or whatever. And that's led to rumors that to this day, there's sometimes people going, "Oh, Carol Fugate's your mom." No, no, no. Again, not a true story. It was not even close. And Terry actually got really kind of upset that people started realizing where it was coming from, and that the whole rumor that this was based on a true story. He had even made Warner Brothers make a deal with movie chains at the time to say, you're not allowed to say this is based on a true story. Even though rumor had gotten out about this being inspired by it, do not say anything about it. And they actively pursued anybody who did. There were a couple theaters that did try to say based on a true story, and they sued them. Back then, the auteur could have some control like that. Anyway, so yeah, he was very, he was a very moral person. That was one thing. I actually got to have lunch with Terrence a couple times, and there was one time that was really interesting. I was walking back to my car. He was going back to edit Thin Red Line, and he said he got really reflective, and he went, "I wonder if I should have made that movie. I wonder if that was a bad idea." What it was is he was concerned about the effect that it had had on her, and anyway, so that was the thing. I really grew to appreciate his moral feelings about all of this, rather than just looking at it as this is something to make money off of, this is something to exploit. He looked at it as just a way to inspire his mind to do something, artistic. But he saw the effect that it had had and all that. And anyway, he'd never really caused any problems, particularly because of the fact that he was always concerned about that and made a point of trying to say to people, this is not based on a true story. Anyway, after all this is where we finally, after 20 minutes, we finally get to where Bruce Springsteen became involved. He saw Badlands, and from it learned that it was based on this, or inspired by the story of Starkweather, and so he read the book I was telling about, Carol. And so yeah, he became obsessed with it, was really fascinated by it, read through a couple of times. And then, as you kind of know, he then wrote based on that. I've never understood it, and this is what I really wanted to understand from him, because if you listen to the lyrics, it's a combination of going from Badlands to the real story and then back to Badlands. And if he loved the book Carol so much, and he would have had to have spent way more time reading the book, if he read it more than once, he would have had to spend way more time reading that than watching the movie. And the book is very much favorable to Carol, and talks about the ordeal she went through. And yet then the song he chose to write, Nebraska, takes from Charlie's point of view. And he even says things like, me and her, we had us some fun. Which actually, I remember that lyric in particular. I'm putting up the lyrics right now so I remember it. But that lyric in particular, at one point, Carol was being interviewed for a show called The Current Affair. And I was in the room when she was doing the interview. It was in the basement of my parents' home. And she was talking about all the different different movies and shows and songs and all sort of thing that had referenced this, and there were a number of them. I mentioned Peter Jackson before because one of his movies involved it as well. She, when it came to the song Nebraska, she broke down crying, and she said, me and her, we had some fun. How could he say that? And she just broke down in tears. And I've thought that too. And I don't mean to be too critical on him, because I think what Bruce Springsteen was trying to do was similar to what Terry did, but Terry changed the names and made a point of being like, this is a different story, where Bruce seemed to take from that openly, and then and then utilize things from both movie and book interchangeably enough to make people think that this was from the real stuff. I'm going to write up Nebraska lyrics so I can go through some of those lyrics. To go through some of them and talk about how where they go. He says, I saw her standing on her front lawn, just twirling her baton. That's from Badlands. Well, the way they actually met, the way that Carol and Charlie actually met, was her sister introduced them. Her sister was dating Charlie, and she wanted to break up with him, and she was too afraid to just break up with him. She knew he was kind of nuts, and she actually wanted to date Charlie's boss. So she had introduced him to Carol, sort of as a way to kind of get rid of him. And it was during that current affair interview, that sister was there. She broke down in tears, telling Carol, "I've held this, as guilty feelings my whole life that I did this, and I'm so sorry. I never meant to put you through all this." But anyway, yeah. So that was how she met him in real life. But in the movie, it's in Badlands is twirling her baton. Me and her went for a ride, sir, and 10 innocent people died. From the town of Lincoln, Nebraska, where it actually did happen. That's not Badlands. So he's like, okay, on the one, he's like, oh yeah, I'm just quoting Badlands. But in the next, I'm quoting the real thing with a sawed-off 410 on my lap. Through the Badlands of Wyoming. They just got into Wyoming when that happened, but he says, I killed everything in my path, which is just about true. There are actually a couple people who, for whatever reason, he didn't kill. He says, I can't say that I'm sorry for the things that we've done, they didn't both do this. This was him. All the evidence points to that. This isn't just because my grandfather was her lawyer. He stayed her lawyer because he believed in her. He did not stay with every client of his. But yeah, at least for a little while, sir, me and her, we had some fun. And then at the end when he says, Sheriff, when I pulls and snaps my poor head back, you make sure my pretty baby is sitting right there on my lap. That was literally Charlie's quote. That was Charlie said that when he was going to be going to the electric chair. He said, I want Carol on my lap. And he would say that throughout her trial, that his goal was for her to get on his lap. And so when he then went on the witness chair, I mean, imagine that. Imagine going to a trial, and imagine you're the one on trial, and someone says, my goal is to make sure you're on the electric chair with me. Then he goes up and testifies against you. Do you think that's very legitimate testimony? But yet, they still pass it on. So when I see Springsteen quoting that, I don't get it. And again, I understand he's using it to deal with his own feelings and his own past and all that. And the movie then, this movie, Deliver Me From Nowhere, goes into his past and what he's dealing with. But what he's dealing with is problems he had with his father. His father was apparently abusive. But in the real story, they didn't kill Charlie's father. They didn't even kill Carol's father. They killed her stepfather. And in Badlands, they don't kill his father. So how is it, why was it that Bruce Springsteen was felt connected to Charlie somehow, enough to make this song from Charlie's point of view? Anyway, I've never understood it. When I wrote my book, and this is, at long last, this is the book I wrote called Pro Bono, The 18-Year Defense of Carol Ann Fugate. It's the true story of the whole thing. You see behind the scenes of the whole thing. It's a very long and complicated story. I have summarized really narrowly. If you have a lot of questions, it's probably because I skipped through a ton of stuff. I mean, you can see it's pretty thick, too. It's one of the longest books I ever wrote. And I also go into the different art forms that it influenced, different shows, movies, etc., including a documentary, actually. If you want a short version of it, there's a documentary on Showtime, I think it's on Paramount Plus now, called The 12th Victim. And I'm actually in it, and I'm interviewed in it and stuff, but that documentary caught it better than anything. It, for one thing, told the story very, very accurately. I was very impressed when I went in to do the interview. Almost every single person in the crew were women. And the reason why that's important is because this is a story that's so often been told by men. And I think that's one reason it's been affected, in this way. Bruce Springsteen, going from Charlie's point of view, not even considering Carol's point of view, man. Terrence Malick, portraying Holly, is just sort of passive, even though he met Carol and saw that that's not who she is, still, portraying it that way. But Ninette Beaver writes this, And, she takes from her point of view. And so now this documentary was being told by women and explained the point of view from their point of view. So I was very impressed with that, and the documentary itself really explained it. Also explained the responsibility one has when they tell a story that's true story. It's not just, hey, look, it's fun. People who take it way too light when they talk about true crime. It's like real people were affected. When I said about the women being brutally murdered, it's stuff I can't even talk about on YouTube. I mean, what the R word is when we talk about, this sort of a thing. Think about that with a blade, and that's to a 16-year-old girl. It's truly sick stuff. So when you hear that song and it's like me and where we had some fun, it's talking about that. He's talking about these really massively horrible, horrible things. These are not fun things. So anyway, that documentary really expressed that in a powerful way to express the importance of talking about these things accurately and responsibly. Finally, now it's been a half hour, so the two of you have stuck around. That might be optimistic. Anyway, here's one last thing to tell you about, since I've been sounding kind of critical of Bruce, but it's more just confusion to me. But to give you a sort of fun story about Bruce Springsteen, I'll tell you about his meeting Ninette Beaver. He contacted her. Actually, he got hold of her through my grandfather's office, and when he called her, he had his assistant call her first, and Ninette picked up the phone, and this woman says, "The boss wants to talk to you." And Ninette goes, "The boss?" And the woman goes, Yeah, the boss. He wants to talk to you." And Ninette just, "So please hold for the boss." And Ninette just goes, "I don't have a boss." And she hung up. And then Bruce called her directly himself, and he was kind of chuckling. He goes, "Well, yeah, people call me the boss." She goes, "Oh, I never really heard of you," all that sort of thing. She was more into jazz music and, that sort of thing. And so she had been from sort of the previous generation. And he said, well, he told her how much he loved her book and all that sort of thing. And he was going to be in a concert in Nebraska doing Born in the USA tour. And he said he'd really like her to come to the concert. He sent her a couple tickets, and she swiftly gave the tickets away to someone else. And he did the concert and found out that she wasn't there, and so he called her again and says, "No, I really want you to come. I'm doing one more concert. Will you please come?" And she said, "Okay." So he sent her a couple more tickets, and she came. And during the concert, he stopped it and had the spotlight go on her and was like, "Read her book. It's so great," etc. Which again leaves me just like, he stopped his concert to talk about how great this woman's book is. This book that talks about how Carol Fugate was screwed, but yet the lyrics to his song are, me and her had some fun raping and murdering. Sorry, I said the word now. Now this will get canceled on YouTube, but whatever. Anyway, but yeah, so he had her go backstage and afterwards and talk to her, and they had a pleasant talk. She told me about how it was a very pleasant, enjoyable conversation with him. He asked what she thought of it. She goes, "Well, I'm more of a Glenn Miller person." Anyway, so yeah, interesting. She talked each time that he came up. She was like, "Yeah, he was a real pleasant man. She liked him and everything, but she didn't really understand his music." And while I understand his music, I love his music. I think the Nebraska album sounds wonderful. I just don't understand the connection. Anyway, that's the story. Sorry to all of you who had to sit through my ramblings. This is why I narrate. This is why I write things down, and why I sound like I am reading, because I'm not an actor, and I ramble when I just get to talking. I'm like an old man. Anyway, thank you for watching. Doodandor, the next one will be coming out really soon, and that'll be a lot more brief. It's way shorter than this. And I'll do something on this that's briefer as well, so it's easier to digest. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and happy journeys, everyone.